Under the moonlit ice of an unfamiliar sky, a warrior wakes with frost already forming around his breath. The stars above him are wrong. The air hums with a presence he has never known. And for the first time in his life, the cold inside him answers to something other than rage. Sub-Zero has survived realms of sorcery, assassins, and gods, but nothing in his training prepared him for a world where ice is not a weapon of fear, but a language of balance, and where the deadliest thing about him may not be his power, but what it threatens to disrupt. If you're drawn to stories where worlds collide, where warriors are forced to confront who they are when stripped of familiar rules, consider supporting this channel by liking the video, sharing it with others who love deep crossover storytelling, and subscribing to stay inside these worlds as they unfold. This story is structured as a slow descent from survival into choice, following one man as he is reshaped by a culture that sees power not as domination, but as responsibility. Each chapter tightens emotional and philosophical pressure, moving from immediate isolation and mistrust toward a conflict that places balance itself at risk, until a final decision reframes what strength truly means. Cold is never neutral. It presses. It listens. It remembers. When Sub-Zero opens his eyes, the first thing he understands is that the cold around him is wrong. It is clean in a way he has never known, untainted by smoke or blood or sorcery. Snow stretches the horizon like a held breath, unbroken except where his body has carved a shallow crater into the ice. Above him, the sky is a pale bowl of stars arranged in unfamiliar patterns, bright and indifferent. He does not recognize the constellations. He does not recognize the air. And for the first time since childhood, the cold does not feel like an extension of his will. It feels like a presence observing him in return. He rises on instinct, muscles coiling before thought has time to intervene. Frost gathers along his forearms, crystalline and sharp, the reflex of a lifetime trained to answer threat before it is fully named. Pain registers second. His ribs ache, his head rings, and somewhere beneath the discipline of breath control, there's the unsettling awareness that something has torn him out of sequence. The last memory is fragmented, ice and fire colliding, a force pulling sideways to reality rather than forward. He does not linger on it. Survival has always demanded forward motion. The wind carries sound, low voices, the crunch of boots on snow that is packed, maintained. He turns, already shaping ice into his palms, and sees figures approaching across the white expanse. They are wrapped in heavy furs dyed in deep blues and muted whites, faces marked by paint rather than scars. They move with caution but not fear, spreading slightly, forming a loose arc the way hunters do when they are unsure what they have cornered. One raises a hand, palm outward, fingers relaxed, a gesture not of surrender, but of pause. Sub-Zero does not recognize the signal, but he recognizes uncertainty. He lowers his center of gravity instead. The cold responds instantly, ice crawling across the ground at his feet, sharpening itself into defensive geometry. The reaction among the approaching figures is immediate. Water rises from the snow itself, drawn upward as if answering a silent command, coiling around their arms in fluid bands that harden into shields. Sub-Zero's eyes narrow. This is not sorcery as he knows it. There are no incantations, no artifacts. The movement is too natural, too intimate. The first clash is brief and chaotic. A burst of ice surges outward from Sub-Zero, jagged and lethal, driven by reflex rather than intent. The response is not an attack, but a redirection. Water meets ice, not to shatter it, but to slow it, to guide its momentum away from flesh. The force dissipates into the snow, leaving the ground fractured but the people unharmed. That restraint unsettles him more than resistance ever could. These are not warriors seeking dominance. They are something else. He retreats before they can adjust, vanishing into the low ridges of ice beyond the settlement. The cold closes behind him, smoothing over the evidence of his passage, but he knows they will follow. They move with the confidence of those who belong to this environment. He does not. Hunger gnaws at him by nightfall, sharp and insistent. His training has carried him through worse. But the isolation here is different. The cold offers no concealment, only exposure. From a distance, he watches their village. Low structures of ice and hide clustered against the wind, light glowing softly from within. He sees no walls, no fortifications, The vulnerability feels deliberate. It is a place built on the assumption that balance, not force, keeps danger at bay. He does not understand how such a philosophy survives. He understands only that it exists and that his presence threatens it. By morning, he is surrounded again, this time by elders whose movements are slower but whose control is absolute. They do not attack. They do not flee. They observe him with an intensity that feels heavier than chains. One of them steps forward and speaks, the language unfamiliar, but the tone unmistakable. Not accusation. Assessment. Sub-Zero stands still, ice humming beneath his skin, aware that every breath he takes here alters something he cannot see. They take him in not as a guest, but as a problem to be contained. He is given shelter at the edge of the settlement. Food placed within reach, but never directly offered. Children stare at him from behind doorways, eyes wide with curiosity edged by fear. He hears the word monster whispered once, softly, as if testing whether it fits. He does not correct it. Names have never saved him before. At night, he listens to the sea beyond the ice, the slow rhythm of water in motion. It is different from the silence he is used to, less obedient, more alive. When he closes his eyes, the cold inside him stirs, restless. For the first time, it does not feel alone. The elders do not speak to him again for 2 days. They do not interrogate him, do not bind him, do not attempt to catalog his abilities. Their restraint is not mercy. It is method. Sub-Zero feels in the way eyes track him without hostility, in the way waterbenders shift subtly whenever he moves, never threatening, never unprepared. He is allowed to walk the perimeter of the settlement under quiet watch. He is not allowed near the sea. Hunger dulls into ache, then into a controlled absence. He has endured sieges longer than this. What unsettles him is not deprivation, but the absence of fear. In other realms, his presence sharpens rooms. Here, it draws attention without panic, as if the people decided that understanding is safer than reaction. That decision leaves him without leverage. Power in use feels heavier than power resisted. On the third night, the temperature drops further, and the village responds as a single organism. Fires are banked, not stoked. Structures are reinforced with flowing ice that thickens where stress will come, not where it already exists. Sub-Zero watches from the edge, studying forms that resemble combat stances only in silhouette. The difference lies in intention. No strike is meant to end. Every movement anticipates balance lost and restored. He tests them without warning. A thin blade of ice forms in his palm and snaps outward toward an empty space between two dwellings. It is precise, controlled, designed to demonstrate capacity without blood. The response is immediate and layered. Water rises from 3 directions, intercepting the blade mid-flight, unraveling it into harmless shards that fall like brittle rain. No one speaks. No one advances. The message is clear. They have accounted for him. That night, he dreams of ice that does not obey. It forms too quickly, too eagerly, as if answering a call he has not made. He wakes with frost creeping across the floor toward him, stopping only when his breath steadies. The cold here is not as alone. It listens to other rhythms. The first direct conversation comes at dawn. An elder approaches and gestures for him to follow. They walk toward the shoreline, stopping short of where ice meets open water. The elder kneels, presses a palm to the frozen surface, and waits. Sub-Zero feels it then, a pull, subtle but undeniable, like gravity turned sideways. The sea beneath the ice moves differently than the cold he commands. It is patient. It does not rush to become a weapon. The elder speaks again, slowly, and though Sub-Zero does not understand words, he understands intent. This place does not teach through force. It teaches through alignment. The implication is not flattering. It suggests that his power is not refined, only concentrated. When they return to the settlement, the tone has shifted. Food is offered directly. A place closer to the communal structures is cleared for him. He is still watched, but now with purpose. The elders have decided he is not an enemy to be expelled, but a fracture to be studied. Children gather closer, curiosity outweighing caution. One reaches out toward the frost that forms unconsciously along his arm. Sub-Zero stills himself too late. The ice reacts before he does, flaring sharply. The child recoils, unhurt but shaken. A waterbender intervenes, dissolving the ice instantly, eyes hard not with anger, but with disappointment. The reaction cuts deeper than reprimand ever could. That evening, an attempt is made to teach him their forms. He stands among them rigid, as they move through sequences designed to circulate breath and intent together. When he tries to follow, his movements fracture the pattern. Ice forms where water should flow. Sharp angles interrupt curves. The cold responds too fast, amplifying every impulse instead of filtering it. The exercise ends early, not in failure, but in recognition. What he carries is not merely different. It is incompatible unless changed. The villagers begin to whisper not of monster, but of imbalance. The word carries weight. It implies responsibility. Sub-Zero has never been held accountable for disruption before, only for results. As night settles, he sits alone near the edge of the ice, watching the moon reflect across the sea. The reflection trembles, never quite settling. He realizes then that this world does not bend to will alone. It requires consent. His power, absolute in other realms, here behaves like a foreign body, rejected not violently, but persistently. The cold inside him tightens, resisting the thought. He has survived by refusing to change. But survival here may demand something else. Beyond the village, beyond the ice, forces are already moving, drawn by rumors of impossible frost. He does not know their names yet. He knows only that if he remains unchanged, this place will suffer for it. The elders do not frame what follows as training. They frame it as listening. Sub-Zero is brought to a wide, shallow basin where the ice thins and the sea breathes close to the surface. The air smells different here, sharp with salt and motion. He is instructed to stand barefoot on the frozen skin of the water and do nothing else. No stances, no shaping, no intent, just breath. The simplicity feels like insult. He complies because refusal would change nothing. His weight settles. Cold spreads upward, familiar and reassuring, but it does not gather with its usual precision. The surface beneath him flexes almost imperceptibly, responding not to his will but to the tide below. The sensation is unsettling. Ice has always been a static thing to him. Frozen consequence given form. Here, it is temporary. Conditional. Hours pass. The elders remain at a distance, silent, present. When Sub-Zero finally allows his breath to slow without forcing it, the cold responds differently. It thins instead of sharpening. It stretches instead of hardening. The realization comes reluctantly. His power has always been about imposition. This world demands negotiation. The first breakthrough is minor and humiliating. He attempts to draw ice upward in a familiar blade, only to have it collapse into slush. The failure sparks anger, and with it, a surge of lethal frost that cracks the basin outward in jagged lines. The elders do not react. They simply wait until the fractures stop spreading. One of them gestures again. Breathe. Days pass this way, marked not by progress but by restraint. He learns to recognize the moment before ice forms, the narrow space where intention can be softened or sharpened. It is there that the Water Tribe philosophy lives. Power not as release, but as delay. Sub-Zero finds that delay harder than violence. Violence ends things. Delay forces him to remain present. At night, he notices changes within himself that feel more dangerous than any external threat. His dreams shift. Where once they were filled with combat and blood-soaked snow, now they hold images of water freezing and thawing in endless cycles. No victory, no defeat, only motion. He wakes unsettled, his control no longer absolute even in sleep. The village adapts around him. Conversations include him without addressing him. Children no longer flinch when frost creeps along his path. One elder begins to sit nearby during his exercises, not instructing, only observing. The unspoken message is consistent. He is being weighed, not judged. Word spreads beyond the ice. Traders arrive with questions they pretend are casual. A man who commands ice without forms. A presence that bends a cold itself. Sub-Zero hears his reputation being constructed in real time, stripped of context and shaped into utility. He recognizes the pattern. This is how weapons are born. One evening, as the sun fails to rise fully above the horizon, he feels it before anyone speaks. A pressure in the air, distant but deliberate. Eyes turn southward. The elders exchange looks that carry history. Balance has been disturbed elsewhere, and imbalance attracts attention. Sub-Zero stands alone at the edge of the basin, watching his reflection distort across the thinning ice. He understands now that mastery here will not come from sharpening himself further, but from deciding what parts of him must dull. The choice feels like erosion, necessary, unforgiving. Far beyond the ice, forces are already calculating how his existence might be used. Here, among people who believe power must answer to harmony, the question is quieter and more dangerous. Whether he can learn to belong without breaking what he touches. Night settles unevenly here, more suggestion than certainty. The horizon never fully darkens, and the moon hangs low and wide, its light diffused by ice and mist until shadows lose their edges. Sub-Zero remains awake long after the village is quieted, seated near the basin where the elders have left him. The cold around him is thinner now, less eager to rise at his command. That restraint feels like weakness. It also feels like survival. A storm moves in from the sea without warning. Not violent at first, just wind, low and persistent, dragging snow across the surface in long, whispering sheets. The village responds instinctively. Structures flex and reinforce. Waterbenders move in calm coordination, redirecting stress, easing pressure points before they fail. Sub-Zero watches the process unfold and recognizes something unsettling. This is not defense. It is maintenance. A refusal to let imbalance accumulate. Then the ice beneath the basin groans. The sound is deep and resonant, carrying through bone more than air. A fracture begins to form, not explosive, but patient, spreading outward in a slow, deliberate arc. The elders do not shout. They do not run. They look to Sub-Zero. Instinct surges before thought can intervene. His hands lift, and the cold answers, sharp and immediate, racing toward the fracture with lethal certainty. The ice thickens too quickly, too rigidly. The crack halts, but the stress redirects. Another fissure opens farther out, closer to the village edge. He has solved the wrong problem. A waterbender steps forward, placing both hands against the ice. The motion is gentle. The ice does not harden further. It softens, redistributing weight, allowing the sea beneath to settle. The original fracture closes without force. The storm continues, but the danger passes. No one reprimands him. That is the cruelty of it. The elder meets his gaze, eyes steady, and speaks a single sentence Sub-Zero does not understand, but feels with uncomfortable clarity. Power that arrives too fast breaks what it tries to save. Later, alone again, he studies his hands. Frost still clings to them, but it is uneven now, thinning and thickening in response to his breath rather than his will. The change frightens him more than failure ever did. Control has always defined him. Without it, he is not a weapon. He is something unfinished. Beyond the ice, far beyond the quiet discipline of this place, rumor is already accelerating. A man who commands winter without bending forms. A force capable of freezing seas and shattering fleets. Sub-Zero senses it the way one senses pressure before strike. Attention is coming. Not curious attention. Hungry attention. The Water Tribe understand this too. Their patience has limits, shaped by generations of survival against stronger enemies. They will not sacrifice balance to protect him. If he remains, he must change fast enough to justify the risk. If he leaves, whatever follows him will not stop at the edge of the ice. Sub-Zero looks out across the frozen sea, feeling the slow, immense movement beneath its surface. For the first time, the cold inside him does not surge forward. It waits. The waiting is harder than any battle he has fought. It is also the first choice he has made here that is not driven by instinct alone. In the distance, something shifts. Not here, not yet, but close enough to matter. By morning, the storm has moved on, leaving the ice smooth and unbroken, as if the night strain has been absorbed and forgiven. The village resumes its rhythm with practiced calm, But something fundamental has shifted. Sub-Zero feels in the way people look at him now. Not with fear, not with curiosity, but with calculation. He has been measured against the environment itself, and found wanting in a way no enemy blade has ever managed. An elder approaches as a pale light spreads across the horizon. There is no ceremony to it, just a pause beside him, a shared look toward the sea, and a slow gesture inviting him to walk. They move along the edge of the settlement, past dwellings shaped by wind and water rather than cut against them. Sub-Zero notices how every structure seems provisional, ready to change if the ice demands it. Permanence here is considered a liability. They stop at a point where the ice thins enough for dark water to show through in shifting patches. The elder speaks quietly, voice steady, and though the words remain foreign, the meaning lands with weight. This place survives because nothing here insists on being absolute. Ice forms, ice yields. Water remembers both states and refuses to choose one forever. Sub-Zero kneels, pressing his palm to the surface. The cold answers, but not as it once did. It does not leap to obey. It waits, sensing the movement below, the slow pull of the tide. For a brief moment, his instinct is to force it, to impose stillness on something that will never consent. He resists. The resistance costs him more than any exertion. Sweat beads at his temples despite the air. When he rises, the elder nods once. Not approval, acknowledgement. The rest of the day passes without incident, but tension hums beneath every interaction. Scouts depart southward, silent and fast. Supplies are counted. Defensive positions are reviewed without urgency, but without illusion. Sub-Zero understands now that his presence has accelerated timelines that once moved slowly. Whatever is coming will come sooner, because of him. As night returns, he stands alone again at the basin, watching ice form and unform beneath his breath. The cold inside him is quieter, less sharp, but more difficult to predict. It has begun to listen to things he cannot command. That realization settles heavily. If he cannot dominate his power here, he must redefine it, not as a blade, not as armor, but as something that can exist without demanding submission. Far across the ice, beyond sight and beyond sound, decisions are being made about him by people who see only potential and threat. Here, among those who believe balance is worth dying for, the choice is narrower and more unforgiving. Adapt, or become the storm that breaks everything it touches. The sea shifts beneath the ice, slow and patient, already carrying the next consequence toward him. The scouts return before dawn, their arrival marked not by alarm but by silence. They move through the settlement like a change in pressure, felt before it is understood. Sub-Zero notices the way conversations stop when they pass, the way elders gather without summoning. No one looks at him directly. They do not need to. His presence is already threaded through whatever news they carry. He is brought into the circle without ceremony. The scouts speak briefly, pointing south, describing movement that does not belong to traders or wanderers. Ships repositioning, camps established where none are needed, fires kept low to avoid notice. The pattern is familiar to him in a way that tightens his jaw. This is how forces assemble when they believe they have discovered an advantage worth seizing. The elders listen without interruption. When the scouts finish, one question is asked, calm and precise. How fast? The answer is not reassuring. Sub-Zero feels the weight of the moment settle fully for the first time. Until now, his struggle has been internal, a negotiation between instinct and restraint. That negotiation is no longer contained. It has consequences that extend beyond his own survival. He has brought attention here, not through intention, but through existence. The realization carries a sharpness no blade could match. He speaks then, the first time he has chosen to do so. His words are measured, stripped of flourish, shaped to convey only what matters. He does not offer reassurance. He does not claim control. He tells them what he knows of those who seek power through domination, of how quickly curiosity becomes strategy. He does not name nations or armies. He does not need to. The elders understand escalation. They have survived it before. The response is not agreement or refusal. It is consideration. They ask him to demonstrate, not his strength, but his restraint. He is brought again to the basin, this time with the entire council watching. The task is simple. Freeze the surface without halting what moves beneath it. Preserve form without arresting flow. Sub-Zero stands, breath steady, hands empty. The cold gathers reluctantly, as if testing his resolve. He feels the sea's motion beneath the ice, slow and vast, indifferent to his effort. For a moment, the familiar urge to force overwhelms him. This would be easier if he allowed it. This would be safer if he returned to what he knows. He does not. He lets the cold form thinly, a skin rather than a wall. The ice spreads in delicate patterns, translucent, flexible. It bends slightly with the tide, creaking but not breaking. Sweat runs freely now, his body fighting against habits carved deep into muscle and nerve. The strain is visible. The elders watch without expression. When it is done, the basin holds. The sea continues its movement beneath, unimpeded. The ice remains intact. The silence that follows is heavier than approval. The elders exchange looks that carry consequence. One steps forward and speaks at length, voice calm but edged with finality. Sub-Zero does not understand every word, but he understands the shape of the decision. He will be allowed to remain, not because he is safe, because he is changing, and because sending him away would not remove the danger, only redirect it. The cost of that decision is immediate. Defensive preparations intensify. Evacuation routes are reviewed. The village does not panic, but it does not pretend either. Balance is not passivity. It is readiness without excess. That night, Sub-Zero stands at the edge of the settlement, looking south across the ice. The cold inside him is quieter than it has ever been, but also heavier, laden with responsibility. He understands now that mastery here is not measured by what he can destroy, but by what he can preserve without claiming ownership. In the distance, beyond the horizon, something waits, not for permission, for opportunity. And for the first time, Sub-Zero does not sharpen himself in response. He steadies. He listens. He prepares to meet the coming storm not as a weapon unleashed, but as a force constrained. The ice beneath his feet shifts, subtle and constant, already carrying the future toward him. The days that follow settle into a taut, watchful calm. Nothing explodes. Nothing announces itself. That, more than anything, confirms Sub-Zero's unease. He has lived his life amid sudden violence, where danger declares itself loudly and ends decisively. Here, danger gathers weight instead of noise. It accumulates. The water tribe does not isolate him, but neither do they integrate him fully. He is placed in the rhythm of preparation. Nets are checked, supplies redistributed. Boats are positioned where ice can release them quickly if retreat becomes necessary. Sub-Zero begins to understand that balance is not an abstract principle here. It is logistical. It is practiced daily without ceremony. He contributes where he can cautiously. When ice reinforcement is needed, he shapes it thin and layered, following a logic he has been forced to learn. Each time he restrains himself, the cold resists slightly less. It does not obey him. It cooperates. The distinction feels fragile, but real. At night, he senses movement far beyond the visible horizon, not through sight or sound, but through disturbance. Patterns in the cold that do not belong to weather. Intent carried across distance by human will. The Fire Nation does not know him yet, not truly, but it knows of him. A rumor sharpened into a possibility. Possibility into planning. One evening, a child approaches him without hesitation and sits nearby, watching his hands as frost forms and recedes with his breath. There is no fear in the gesture, only curiosity. Sub-Zero stills himself completely. The ice withdraws. The child smiles, small and unguarded, then runs off. The moment lingers longer than it should. It is the first time his presence has not distorted the space around him. The elders notice. They say nothing. By the end of the week, the scouts report confirmed sightings. Fire Nation banners glimpsed at distance. Ships holding position beyond icebreak range. The threat has taken shape. It is no longer abstract. Sub-Zero stands with the elders as plans are spoken softly and precisely. He is included now, not as a savior, but as a variable that must be accounted for honestly. That inclusion carries its own burden. If he fails, the consequences will not be his alone. As the moon rises again over the polar sea, Sub-Zero stands at the basin one last time before sleep. The ice forms beneath his feet, thin and responsive, flexing with the tide. He holds it there without strain. For the first time, the cold does not push back. He understands, with quiet certainty, that his arrival here was not an ending or an escape. It was a beginning shaped by limits. The war he has known all his life is approaching from the south, but the war he must fight now is inward, measured not in victories, but in restraint. Beyond the ice, the Fire Nation gathers its strength, unaware that what waits for it is no longer a weapon-seeking release, but force learning how to stand still without breaking the world beneath it. The first flames appear on the horizon 2 nights later, faint and distant, but unmistakable. They do not roar. They flicker with disciplined restraint, signaling camps rather than attacks. The Fire Nation does not announce itself with chaos. It announces with certainty. Sub-Zero watches a glow from the edge of the ice and feels a familiar tightening in his chest. This is the prelude he knows well. The moment before orders are given, before objectives are defined, before lives are reduced to acceptable loss. The Water Tribe responds without ceremony. There is no council fire, no raised voices. Assignments are understood. Families are moved inland along routes prepared long before his arrival. Hunters take positions along ridges where sightlines stretch for leagues. Waterbenders test currents beneath the ice, mapping stress points with quiet precision. Sub-Zero moves among them as both participant and anomaly, aware that every decision now accounts for him, whether spoken or not. A scout approaches him near dusk, delivering information not as warning but as fact. The Fire Nation ships are not advancing yet. They are waiting, observing, measuring resistance before committing resources. This is not a raid. It is an assessment. Sub-Zero understands the implication immediately. Someone among them has decided he is worth studying before being seized or destroyed. That knowledge settles heavily. He has been a weapon before, wielded by others, pointed and released. He knows how that calculus works. Power is valued only insofar as it can be controlled. If it cannot, it is eliminated. The Fire Nation will come to one of those conclusions soon. He returns to the basin alone, seeking the one place where his thoughts can slow enough to be useful. The ice forms beneath him with minimal effort now, responding to his presence rather than his command. Beneath it, the sea moves steadily, unconcerned with banners or ambition. He focuses on that motion, on the indifference of water to human design. It is grounding. It is humbling. For the first time, he considers leaving. The thought arrives fully formed, practical and unsentimental. If he departs now, the Fire Nation's interests may follow him instead of settling here. The Water Tribe would regain its equilibrium. He would resume the familiar role of wandering threat, drawing danger away from those who did not choose it. The logic is sound. It is how he has survived before. But the cold inside him does not surge at the idea. It tightens, hesitates. He realizes then that leaving would not restore balance. It would merely displace the fracture. The Fire Nation has already seen enough. Curiosity, once awakened, does not sleep easily. And more than that, something within him has changed. The restraint he has learned here would fracture under flight. Running would return him to instinct, to sharpness without consent. Whatever he is becoming cannot be carried forward intact if he abandons it at the first pressure. At dawn, he speaks again, this time to the elders without being summoned. He does not argue. He states plainly that the Fire Nation will not be satisfied with observation. That escalation is inevitable, that his presence increases the risk, but his absence will not remove it. He offers himself not as solution, but as shield, one that will hold only if used carefully. The elders listen. One asks him a question that requires no translation. Can you hold without striking? Sub-Zero answers honestly. He says he does not know yet, but he is learning. That is enough. The decision is made quietly. He will stand with them when contact comes. Not at the front, not unleashed. Position where failure will cost him first. Not them. The acceptance is conditional and severe. He welcomes it. As the sun rises over the ice, Sub-Zero takes his place along the outer ridge, overlooking the frozen sea and the distant glow of waiting fire. The cold gathers around him, thinner than it has ever been, responsive rather than eager. He breathes slowly, feeling the weight of restraint settle into muscle and bone. This is no longer a test of strength. It is a test of patience, of whether a man forged to end fights can learn to hold a line without breaking it. Beyond the horizon, forces are aligning, decisions already in motion. The first collision of worlds is imminent, and as the ice shifts beneath his feet, Sub-Zero understands that whatever happens next will determine not just whether he survives here, but whether the balance he has touched can survive him. The waiting stretches longer than Sub-Zero expects. Hours pass without movement from the southern horizon, and the absence of action gnaws at him more than an attack would. Fire has always been honest in its intent. It advances, consumes, declares itself. This stillness is calculation. It is the pause of those deciding how much resistance is worth acknowledging. The wind shifts near midday, carrying with it a faint metallic tang that does not belong to ice or sea. Sub-Zero inhales slowly, cataloging the scent the way he once cataloged battlefields. Oil, treated metal, discipline layered over aggression. The Fire Nation is closer now, close enough that their presence begins to press against the edges of the world, altering it without touching it. A single ship advances into clearer view, its hull reinforced, its profile unmistakable. It does not break ice. It stops just short of it, letting distance do the work of intimidation. Smoke rises in a thin, controlled column, visible but restrained. A signal, not of attack, but of intent to be seen. Water Tribe defenders do not respond. They hold position, scattered and calm, denying the Fire Nation a focal point. Sub-Zero feels the pressure to act rise within him, the familiar itch to meet threat with decisive force. He breathes through it, anchoring himself in the slow, massive movement beneath the ice. The sea does not rush. Neither will he. A small craft attaches from his ship and glides forward, stopping well beyond the ice edge. A figure stands at its prow, armored in red and gold, posture rigid, gaze fixed on the settlement. A voice carries across the frozen expanse, amplified by fire-bending heat and deliberate projection. The words are formal, measured, demanding audience and explanation. They name no crimes yet. They offer no violence yet. They ask questions framed as courtesy. The elders do not answer. The silence stretches, heavy and intentional. Sub-Zero understands the tactic immediately. The Water Tribe refuses to define the encounter on the Fire Nation's terms. No negotiation. No justification. Balance does not argue its existence. The Fire Nation envoy speaks again, tone tightening slightly. This time the questions narrow. Reports of an anomaly. A man who commands ice without bending forms. A force observed and verified. The implication is clear. This is not about the tribe. It is about him. Sub-Zero feels eyes shift toward him. Not accusatory. Not pleading. Expectant. The decision is his to make, but the consequences will be shared. He steps forward. The movement alone sends a ripple through the air. Cold gathers unconsciously around him, then settles as he reins it in. He does not advance to the ice edge. He stops well short, placing himself visibly between the village and the waiting fire. The positioning is deliberate. Shield, not spear. When he speaks, his voice is low and unadorned. He gives no name, no allegiance. He states only that the ice here is not claimed, and that those who live upon it intend to remain. The words are simple. They do not invite response. They establish boundary. For a moment, the Fire Nation envoy studies him in silence. Sub-Zero can feel the assessment unfolding, the mental calculations flickering behind armor composure. This is not the reaction of someone facing an unknown monster. It is the reaction of someone identifying an asset and determining cost. The envoy smiles slightly, a gesture devoid of warmth. He responds with praise disguised as observation, rare ability, unprecedented control, a talent wasted in isolation. He speaks of order, of progress, of how power finds its proper place under disciplined command. The offer is not explicit, but it is unmistakable. Join or be removed. Sub-Zero listens without interruption. When the envoy finishes, Sub-Zero answers with a single sentence. He says that ice which is force will always break. The silence that follows is sharper than any threat. The envoy's smile fades, replaced by something colder and more dangerous: certainty. He inclines his head once, a gesture that acknowledges conclusion rather than agreement. The small craft withdraws, returning to the larger ship. Smoke thickens slightly. Signals pass unseen across the water. The Fire Nation has made its decision. As the ship pulls back into the haze, Sub-Zero remains where he is, breathing evenly, feeling the tremor that runs through the ice beneath his feet. It is not fear, it is anticipation. The storm he has sensed since his arrival is no longer approaching. It is forming. Behind him, the village does not stir. No one thanks him. No one reassures him. They have moved past such things. Preparation resumes, calm and exacting. Sub-Zero turns back toward the basin, toward the quiet discipline that has begun to reshape him. He understands now that this world will not test him with immediate violence. It will test him with pressure, with patience, with the demand that he remain restrained even as fire gathers. Chapter by chapter, breath by breath, the man he was is being stripped away, not by force, but by necessity. As night falls again and the southern horizon glows faintly red, Sub-Zero stands alone on the ice, feeling the cold respond softly to his presence. This is no longer about survival alone. It is about whether balance can hold when confronted by a power that refuses to yield. And as the ice flexes beneath him, carrying the distant promise of conflict closer with every tide, the world waits to see whether restraint can endure what strength never could. The night deepens, and with it comes the sound Sub-Zero has been expecting but hoping not to hear. Not engines, not marching feet. Drums, low and distant, carry across ice and water in measured intervals. They do not quicken. They do not falter. Each beat is a reminder that the Fire Nation does not rush what it intends to claim. The Water Tribe responds without mirroring the sound. No answering rhythm. No challenge. Fires are extinguished until only embers remain. The settlement dims, becoming part of the landscape rather than a mark upon it. Sub-Zero moves to the outer paths, aware of how his presence alters the cold even now. Frost gathers, then thins again as he steadies himself. Every step is deliberate. Every breath is counted. He stops at the basin one last time before the inevitable shift from waiting to consequence. The ice here is nearly transparent, the sea beneath visible in slow, dark motion. He kneels and presses his palm to the surface. The cold answers gently, forming without resistance. He holds it there, not thickening, not withdrawing. The effort is constant, the balance fragile. For the first time, memory intrudes unbidden. Not a battle's won, but a moments before them. The silence before orders, the narrowing of the world into targets and angles. That narrowing does not come now. Instead, the world remains wide. Sea, ice, people sleeping behind him, trusting that preparation is enough. The weight of that trust settles heavier than armor. Footsteps approach, soft and unhurried. An elder stands beside him, gazing down through the ice as if reading the tide itself. No words are exchanged. None are needed. The presence is acknowledgement, not reassurance. Sub-Zero understands that when the moment comes, no command will release him. He will have to choose restraint again and again, even if the cost of restraint is defeat. The drums cease abruptly near dawn. Silence floods the horizon, sudden and absolute. Sub-Zero rises slowly, every sense attuned. This is not withdrawal. It is transition. The Fire Nation has completed its assessment. The next movement will not be tentative. Light returns to the sky in pale layers. The ice creaks softly as temperatures shift. Sub-Zero takes his position along the ridge once more, overlooking the frozen expanse where fire waits beyond sight. He does not summon ice into weapons. He does not harden the ground beneath him. He holds the cold lightly, allowing it to exist without direction. In that stillness, he understands something with clarity that borders on pain. The balance he has touched here is not a state to be achieved. It is an action to be sustained. It demands attention without obsession, strength without dominance, presence without control. It is harder than any discipline he has known. Morning arrives without relief. The light spreads thinly across the ice, revealing no movement where fire was last seen, no ships breaking formation, no banners advancing. The absence is deliberate. Sub-Zero understands this tactic, as well as any he has faced before. When an enemy waits, it is because they want the other side to make the first mistake. The Water Tribe does not oblige them. Life resumes in quiet fragments. Nets are checked. Children are kept close, but not hidden. Hunters rotate positions along the ridges, their movement staggered, so no single pattern can be mapped. Everything is done with the same discipline Sub-Zero has begun to recognize as fundamental rather than reactive. Balance is maintained not through stillness, but through constant, almost invisible adjustment. He is part of that adjustment now. Not centered, not elevated. Placed where his presence absorbs attention, without drawing the village into its gravity. The elders have done this intentionally. He sees it clearly. If fire strikes, it will strike him first. If it hesitates, it will hesitate because of him. Either way, the village gains time. The realization does not inspire pride. It inspires caution. As the hours pass, Sub-Zero feels a strain of restraint settle deeper into his body. Holding the cold lightly requires constant awareness. When his focus slips, even for a moment, ice begins to sharpen instinctively, edges forming where none are needed. Each time, he reins it back, thinning the frost, allowing flexibility to return. The process leaves him exhausted in a way battle never did. There is no release here, only continuation. Near midday, the sea beneath the ice grows more active, not violently, deliberately. Tides shift, pressure lines adjust, and Sub-Zero senses something large repositioning beyond sight. Ships do not need to advance to exert influence. Sometimes it is enough to be felt. An elder approaches again, this time carrying a small vessel carved from bone and ice. Water sloshes gently within it. The elder sets on the frozen ground between them and gestures. Sub-Zero understands the invitation. Without explanation, he kneels, places his hand around the vessel, and feels the water inside respond. Not to command, to proximity. He does nothing else. Slowly, the water cools, not freezing, not hardening, simply settling into a temperature that mirrors the world around it. The elder watches closely, then nods once. The lesson is subtle and severe. Influence without force. Change without capture. It is the opposite of everything Sub-Zero was taught. When the elder leaves, the vessel remains. Sub-Zero does not touch it again. He does not need to. The sensation lingers, a quiet confirmation that something within him has begun to align rather than dominate. By late afternoon, a shift occurs along the southern horizon. Smoke thins. Drums do not return. Instead, scouts report movement eastward. Ships repositioning, as if testing angles rather than committing to approach. The Fire Nation is not retreating. It is refining its options. Sub-Zero watches the horizon and feels a familiar pull toward escalation rise within him. He could act now. A surge of ice across the sea, a demonstration of power so absolute it would force reaction. He knows exactly how to do it. The knowledge sits ready, precise and lethal. He does not move. The choice costs him. The cold inside him tightens painfully, frustrated by refusal. His breath stutters once before he steadies it. The sea beneath the ice continues its slow movement, indifferent to his internal struggle. That indifference anchors him. He lets it. As evening approaches, the village gathers for a quiet meal. Sub-Zero eats among them, no longer separated by distance, though conversation still flows around him rather than toward him. That, too, is intentional. He is included without being centered, trusted without being relied upon. It is the most difficult position he has ever held. When night falls again, the ice reflects the stars in unfamiliar patterns. Sub-Zero stands alone near the basin, listening to the soft creak and shift of a world that refuses to be frozen into certainty. He understands now that whatever comes next will not be resolved quickly. This will not be a single clash, a decisive moment. It will be pressure sustained over time, testing whether restraint can outlast ambition. He exhales slowly, feeling the cold respond with quiet compliance rather than eager obedience. The man he was would have sharpened himself for what lies ahead. The man he is becoming does something harder. He waits. The waiting finally breaks not with fire, but with movement beneath the ice. It begins as a tremor so subtle most would miss it, a slow alteration in the rhythm Sub-Zero has come to recognize as the sea's voice. The motion is not natural. It carries intent. Something heavy is being repositioned, not to advance, but to prepare the ground for what will follow. He feels the impulse to act surge again, sharp and urgent, the old instinct screaming that anticipation is weakness. He answers it with stillness. The decision is not passive. It is active, deliberate, sustained. He adjusts his stance, redistributes his weight, allows the cold to thin even further around him. The ice beneath his feet flexes, complaining softly, but it holds. The sea accepts the compromise. The balance remains intact, fragile and temporary, like breath held between words. Behind him, the village remains quiet. No alarms, no calls to arms. The water tribe understands what he is doing now, even if they do not articulate it. This is not the moment to declare strength. It is the moment to deny the enemy information. Fire cannot measure what refuses to perform. As darkness returns, Sub-Zero feels exhaustion settle into his bones. Not the sharp fatigue of battle, but a deeper weariness born of constant restraint. He welcomes it. Exhaustion dulls instinct. It forces deliberation. He sits at the basin once more, lowering himself carefully, palms resting on the ice without pressing. For a long time, nothing happens. Then the cold responds in a way it never has before. It does not rise. It does not sharpen. It simply exists alongside him, matching his stillness without effort. The sensation is quiet and profound. For the first time since his arrival, the cold is not something he wields or resists. It is something he shares space with. He understands, in that moment, why this place has survived stronger enemies for so long. Balance here is not enforced. It is practiced until it becomes difficult to disrupt. Violence can shatter it, but only briefly. What endures is a discipline to restore it again and again, without spectacle. Far beyond the ice, fire continues to gather, its patience thinning. Sub-Zero knows the confrontation will come. Not tonight, not on terms he expects. When it does, it will test everything he had begun to learn and expose every part of him that remains unchanged. But that belongs to what follows. For now, beneath an unfamiliar sky, with ice breathing gently beneath his hands, Sub-Zero allows himself one truth without judgment. He has not come here to conquer this world or escape his own. He has come to be reshaped by something that does not bend to force. The cold accepts that. And somewhere beyond the horizon, fire takes notice. The shift comes at dusk, when light and shadow blur just enough for certainty to weaken. Sub-Zero senses it before any scout speaks. A tightening in the air that feels less like weather and more like a tension finally deciding where to rest. The Fire Nation has finished waiting, not for permission, for alignment, for the moment when patience can be converted into leverage. The first sign is heat, faint and distant, bleeding to the cold and thin, almost polite strands. It does not melt the ice. It tests it. Sub-Zero feels a response ripple outward beneath his feet, the sea adjusting to a new imbalance introduced from afar. He steadies himself, breathing slowly, refusing the instinct to counter heat with sudden, absolute cold. Reaction would confirm interest. Restraint keeps the equation unresolved. Along the ridges, water tribe sentinels shift positions without signal, movement staggered and precise. No single line forms. No obvious defenses offered. The village becomes diffuse, difficult to read, its strength distributed rather than concentrated. Sub-Zero understands the strategy intimately. An enemy cannot strike what it cannot define. The heat intensifies briefly, then recedes. A probe, somewhere beyond sight, firebenders test range and response, seeking the limits of what the ice will tolerate. Sub-Zero does nothing. He lets the cold thin further, allowing it to absorb rather than resist. The effort leaves his muscles trembling. This is harder than freezing an ocean. Freezing is decisive. This is endless. An elder approaches quietly, stopping beside him without breaking his focus. There is no instruction. The presence alone communicates what matters. Hold, not the ice, not the line, yourself. When the heat withdraws completely, the sea beneath the ice settles into a slower rhythm. The moment passes without incident, but its significance lingers. The Fire Nation has confirmed what it needed. The ice responds. The anomaly remains. The problem persists. Night falls heavier this time. Stars emerge, unfamiliar and sharp, reflected faintly across the frozen surface. Sub-Zero stands at the edge of the basin, exhaustion pressing into him like gravity. He allows it. The cold around him remains cooperative, thin and responsive, a fragile skin stretched over motion that never stops. He realizes then that this restraint is not a temporary measure. It is a condition. If he abandons it, even briefly, the balance here will not forgive him quickly. Sleep comes in fragments. When he dreams, there is no combat, only water freezing and thawing in slow, repeating cycles, never settling, never concluding. He wakes before dawn with the sense that something within him has been rearranged, not improved, not weakened, but reoriented. Morning brings no attack. It brings confirmation. Scouts report Fire Nation ships holding position farther out now, adjusting angles, widening the arc. The pattern suggests containment rather than assault. They are isolating the region, mapping reactions, waiting for fatigue to do what force cannot. Sub-Zero listens, absorbing the implications without commentary. He understands this form of pressure. It is designed to make restraint feel like failure, to make action feel inevitable. He returns to the basin as light spreads across the ice, standing barefoot, once more on the thinning surface. He does not summon cold. He allows it. The ice forms gently, flexing with the tide, holding without rigidity. The sea moves beneath, unimpeded. The balance holds for now. He recognizes, with a clarity that carries both relief and dread, that this is a true beginning. Everything before has been preparation, a stripping away of reflex and assumption. What comes next will test whether this discipline can survive contact with deliberate aggression, with manipulation designed to provoke the very excess he has learned to resist. Sub-Zero lifts his gaze toward the southern horizon, where fire waits beyond sight, patient and calculating. He does not harden himself in response. He does not sharpen his will into a weapon. He anchors himself instead to the slow, relentless movement beneath the ice, to a power that endures precisely because it refuses to dominate. The cold responds softly, not eager, not obedient, but present. The waiting is no longer empty. It is charged, directional, irreversible. The pressure changes on the fourth night, subtle enough that only someone who has lived inside violence would recognize it. The Fire Nation does not advance. It reframes the problem. The heat that bleeds into the air now is uneven, drifting rather than probing, meant to irritate rather than test. It is designed to make patience uncomfortable. Sub-Zero feels it scrape against its concentration, a low abrasion that invites correction. He does not correct it. Instead, he widens his awareness, allowing the cold to thin further, stretching across a broader surface rather than compacting it into strength. The effort taxes him immediately. His breathing deepens, shoulders tightening as he resists the urge of focused power into something clean and final. Around him, the ice creaks softly, a living thing negotiating stress rather than denying it. Beneath that sound, the sea continues its slow movement, indifferent to banners and intent. The water tribe adapts again. Fishing routes shift. Patrols rotate faster. Heat signatures are denied purchase by constant motion. The village becomes less a place and more a pattern. Difficult to isolate, impossible to seize quickly. Sub-Zero sees now why direct conquest here has always failed. Balance is not defended. It is dissolved and reformed elsewhere, again and again, until the attacker exhausts itself. By dawn, the heat recedes. Scouts confirm what Sub-Zero already senses. Fire Nation ships have repositioned farther apart, widening their net. This is not preparation for assault. It is preparation for attrition. They intend to wait until restraint becomes error. The knowledge settles heavily. Sub-Zero understands attrition. He has inflicted it before. He knows how it hollows resolve without visible damage. He also knows its weakness. Attrition assumes the target cannot change faster than pressure accumulates. He returns to the basin, exhaustion threading through him like a second pulse. The ice here is nearly translucent now, a fragile membrane that mirrors the sky above it. He stands upon it without forcing solidity, allowing microfractures to form and close as the tide moves. The technique is imperfect. It demands constant adjustment. It leaves no room for anger. A memory surfaces uninvited, not of battle, but of training, of being taught that hesitation is death, that control must be absolute, that power in use is power wasted. The doctrine feels distant now, not wrong so much as incomplete. Here, unused power preserves more than it destroys. As the day stretches, the Fire Nation escalates again, not with heat but with sound. Distant detonations echo across the ice, not aimed at structures or people, but at the sea itself. Shock waves ripple beneath the surface, designed to destabilize the ice without direct confrontation. Sub-Zero feels the impact roll through his legs, up his spine, rattling his teeth. The basin fractures outward in hairline cracks. This time, instinct flares dangerously close to action. Freezing the sea solid would stop the shock waves instantly. It would also announce him beyond doubt, confirming every fear and ambition driving the attack. He clenches his jaw, breath shuddering once before he forces it steady. He lowers himself to one knee, spreading his hands wide, not to command the cold, but to distribute it. The ice thickens slightly, not enough to harden into armor, but enough to dampen the shock. The sea adjusts, absorbing the rest. The cracks slow, close. The village remains intact. Pain lances through his temples. Blood beads at his nose, hot against the cold air. He does not wipe it away. He remains where he is until the pressure passes. The elders do not approach him afterward. They do not need to. The message is clear. This is a line, not a boundary on the ice, but a threshold within him. He has crossed it by choosing endurance over dominance, again and again, under conditions designed to strip that choice away. As night falls, the detonations cease. Fire Nation ships hold position, having learned what they needed. He can be pressured. He can be exhausted. He will not break easily. Sub-Zero stands alone as the stars emerge, feeling the cold respond weakly now, stretched thin by hours of restraint. He welcomes the fatigue. It means he has not defaulted to what he was. It means something new is taking hold, fragile and costly. Beyond the horizon, fire recalculates. It will return with a different approach. He knows that with certainty. What he does not know is how much more restraint he can sustain before even balance begins to crack. The sea shifts beneath the ice, carrying consequences forward with indifferent patience. The next escalation comes not as an attack, but as an offer. It arrives at midday, carried across the ice by a single vessel advancing alone, its hull unadorned, its engines muted. No banners fly, no drum sound. The restraint is deliberate, calculated to signal reason rather than threat. Sub-Zero watches from the ridge as the craft stops well beyond the ice edge, holding position where distance itself becomes a statement. This is not fire unleashed. This is fire attempting to negotiate. A lone figure steps forward, unarmored, heat shimmering faintly around his hands to keep the cold from biting too deeply. The man's posture is practiced neutrality, neither deferential nor aggressive. His voice carries easily across the frozen expanse, shaped by training rather than emotion. He does not demand audience. He requests it. He does not accuse. He inquires. The words are measured, but their intent is sharp. The Fire Nation has no interest in the village, he says. No quarrel with their way of life. Their concern lies with an anomaly that disrupts equilibrium beyond this region. A man whose control over ice exceeds known bending disciplines. A force that, left unaccounted for, introduces unacceptable uncertainty. Sub-Zero feels the pressure of the moment settle over him like frost. This is the pivot he knows well. The moment when violence pauses long enough for leverage to be applied. The Fire Nation is not offering peace. It is offering containment under the guise of cooperation. The elders remain silent. They do not answer for him. They do not answer at all. Sub-Zero steps forward again, stopping well short of the ice edge, maintaining the same distance he has since the first contact. The positioning matters. He does not advance into negotiation space. He does not retreat into protection. He stands between unclaimed. The envoy turns his attention fully toward him now, eyes assessing rather than threatening. He speaks again, this time directly. There is admiration in his tone, carefully calibrated. Rare talent, he says, power refined through discipline. The Fire Nation understands such things. They offer structure, purpose, a place where ability is not feared or restrained, but perfected, where balance is enforced rather than hoped for. Sub-Zero listens without interruption. He has heard variations of this speech before, spoken by warlords, clans, and masters who believed order could be imposed from the top down. The familiarity is almost comforting. It means he knows exactly where it leads. When he answers, his voice is quiet, stripped of emphasis. He says only that balance, which must be enforced, will never stop enforcing itself, that it will always demand more. The envoy does not argue. He smiles slightly, the expression of someone confirming a hypothesis rather than receiving an insult. He nods once, as if acknowledging a conclusion reached independently. The offer dissolves without ceremony. The craft withdraws, engines humming softly as it retreats to rejoin the waiting ships. The Fire Nation has learned what it needed. He cannot be recruited quickly. He cannot be compelled without cost. The equation shifts accordingly. The sea beneath the ice grows restless again as the ships reposition, wider now, slower, establishing perimeter that does not touch but influences everything within it. The tactic is clear. Pressure will continue. Not enough to provoke decisive response. Enough to erode endurance. Sub-Zero feels the strain settle deeper into his body as the day wanes. His muscles ache not from exertion, but from constant control. The cold responds sluggishly now, stretched thin by hours of negotiation rather than domination. He understands that this fatigue is precisely what the Fire Nation intends to cultivate. Exhaustion breeds mistakes. Mistakes justify escalation. As night approaches, the elders gather briefly, exchanging looks rather than words. Plans adjust again. Routes shift. Supplies redistribute. The village becomes more diffuse, less legible to hostile observation. Sub-Zero remains where he is, neither invited into discussion nor excluded from its consequences. That is intentional. He is still the variable around which everything turns. When darkness settles, the detonations do not resume. The heat does not probe. Instead, silence presses in, heavy and deliberate. Sub-Zero stands at the basin, blood dried dark beneath his nose, breath steady despite the ache threading through him. He understands now that restraint alone will not end this. The Fire Nation will not withdraw simply because he refuses to perform. They will wait until restraint itself becomes unsustainable. The realization is sobering. Balance here is not fragile because it is weak. It is fragile because it must be renewed constantly, without guarantee that renewal will be enough. Sub-Zero lowers himself onto the ice, palms resting lightly against the surface, feeling the sea move beneath him with patient indifference. He does not freeze it. He does not still it. He allows it to continue, anchoring himself to its rhythm rather than his own. Whatever comes next will not be a single decision or moment of clarity. It will be a series of choices made under diminishing margins, each one testing whether the discipline he is learning can survive prolonged pressure. Far beyond the ice, fire settles into patience once more, and Sub-Zero, forged for decisive endings, prepares himself for something far more difficult. The silence holds for 3 days. It is not empty silence. It is structured. Sub-Zero feels the way he once felt the pause between strikes, the fraction of time where an opponent decides whether to commit. The Fire Nation does nothing visible, and that restraint weighs on him more than heat or shock ever did. Pressure without manifestation forces the mind to fill the gap, and he works constantly to prevent instinct from doing that work for him. The Water Tribe adapts to the new rhythm. They sleep in shorter intervals. Fires are rotated and concealed. Paths across the ice change nightly, not to evade pursuit, but to avoid becoming predictable. Sub-Zero is folded deeper into these patterns now, not because he has earned trust, but because his presence distorts outcomes whether included or not. Exclusion would be a choice as loud as elevation. Fatigue accumulates quietly. His body is trained for endurance, but not for this. Holding power in suspension drains him in ways battle never did. When he closes his eyes, even briefly, the cold surges instinctively, seeking release. He catches it each time, thinning it back down, breathing to the tremor that follows. The effort leaves him shaking, jaw clenched hard enough to ache. On the fourth night, the sea changes again. Not violently, not immediately. The tide beneath the ice slows, then revere reed-like, creating opposing currents that grind gently against one another. The friction sends vibrations through the ice, not cracks, but a constant whispering strain. Sub-Zero recognizes the tactic instantly. This is not meant to break the surface. It is meant to deny rest, to keep the ice in a state of perpetual near-failure. He moves to the basin without being told. The elders watch from a distance, faces unreadable. He lowers himself carefully, spreading his weight, letting the cold extend outward in a thin, elastic layer. The ice responds reluctantly, flexing as the currents pull in opposite directions. His breath shortens. Sweat beads along his spine, despite the cold. He could stop this. He knows that with certainty. A decisive freeze would lock the opposing currents into stillness, buying hours, maybe days, of stability. It would also announce his limits, his threshold, his willingness to intervene directly. Fire would adapt instantly, so he does nothing decisive. Instead, he adjusts constantly, minute corrections, micro-responses that prevent escalation without resolving tension. The effort demands absolute focus. His thoughts narrow, not into aggression, but into attention. The world reduces to pressure, breath, motion. Hours pass without measure. When dawn finally bleeds into the sky, the opposing currents ease. The sea resumes a more natural rhythm, as if satisfied with what it has learned. Sub-Zero remains kneeling long after, hands numb, vision blurred. When he rises, his legs buckle briefly before he steadies himself. No one rushes to help. They do not need to. Survival here does not rely on intervention unless it is essential. Later that day, the Fire Nation breaks its silence in a different way. Smoke rises far to the east, not from ships, but from the sea itself. Control burns, tests of heat against water, conducted well away from the ice. They are mapping reactions, building a library of response without committing to engagement. Sub-Zero watches the distant plumes and feels the edge of something dangerous within himself. Not anger, but calculation. He understands now that restraint alone will not end the standoff. Fire is not seeking provocation. It is seeking certainty. The question is not whether he will act, but when and how. Every hour, he holds back narrows their unknowns. Every adaptation he makes teaches him something. That realization cuts deeper than exhaustion. Balance here is not a shield. It is a negotiation conducted under observation. As night returns, Sub-Zero stands at the edge of the ice, breathing slowly, letting the cold thin until it is barely present at all. The sea moves beneath him, vast and unbothered. For a fleeting moment, he envies it. Water does not choose sides. It endures. He knows and that the next phase will require more than restraint. It will require intention without dominance, action without escalation, a way to shift the equation while confirming the Fire Nation's assumptions. The thought does not come fully formed. It lingers at the edge of awareness, uncomfortable and incomplete. He does not chase it. He lets it sit, trusting that clarity here, like ice, forms best when not forced. Far beyond the horizon, Fire continues to watch, and within the quiet discipline of the polar night, Sub-Zero prepares for a choice that will define not how strong he is, but how carefully he can change the course of pressure without breaking the world that holds him. The idea takes shape slowly, not as strategy but as unease. Sub-Zero feels it while standing alone at the basin, watching thin ice flex and settle beneath his feet. Fire had been pressing from the outside, probing, exhausting, cataloging responses. He has answered by holding, by thinning, by refusing to give a kind of certainty that invites decisive force. But in doing so, he has allowed the terms of engagement to remain unchanged. Fire still waits. Fire still watches. Balance, for all its discipline, is being studied like a specimen pinned in place. That realization settles into him with uncomfortable clarity. Balance that never moves becomes predictable. Predictability is a weakness. The water tribe has survived by dissolving and reforming, by refusing to present a single surface long enough to be shattered. He has been acting as a fixed point within that fluid system, a constant pressure valve holding against escalation. Necessary, effective, and increasingly dangerous. Fire does not need him to fail. It only needs him to remain legible. He closes his eyes and inhales, letting the cold thin until it is barely more than a sensation. For the first time since his arrival, he does not focus on maintaining the ice beneath him. He allows it to respond on its own, trusting the sea to support what it must. The sensation is terrifying. It feels like stepping into emptiness. It feels like relinquishing control entirely. When he opens his eyes, the ice is not broken. The implication is subtle but profound. Balance here does not require his constant correction. It requires trust in processes larger than his will. His role, if it is to remain viable, cannot be to hold a line indefinitely. It must be to change how the line is perceived. He seeks out the elders before the thought can harden into doctrine. There is no council chamber, no formal assembly. They gather where they always have, near the edge of ice and sea, where decisions are shaped by elements rather than walls. Sub-Zero speaks carefully, choosing each word as if it might fracture something if mishandled. He does not propose attack. He does not propose withdrawal. He speaks of movement, of absence, of becoming harder to measure. The elders listen without interruption. When he finishes, one of them asks a question that cuts directly to the heart of it. Will fire still follow? Sub-Zero does not hesitate. He says yes. The answer does not trouble them as much as he expects. They understand pursuit. They understand that some dangers cannot be eliminated, only redirected. What matters is where the pressure is allowed to settle and what it is allowed to damage when it does. Balance is not about avoiding conflict. It is about choosing where imbalance is least destructive. The plan that emerges is not dramatic. It is almost disappointing in its restraint. Sub-Zero will move, not south toward the Fire Nation, not inland towards safety. He will go east, across shifting ice and open water, into regions where the Fire Nation's calculations are less precise and the Water Tribe's influence thins naturally. He will not announce his departure. He will not demonstrate power. He will simply be gone. The village will change, nothing else. Fire will have to decide whether to follow the anomaly or maintain pressure on a settlement that now appears unchanged. Either choice introduces uncertainty. Either choice disrupts the clean perimeter they have been building. Sub-Zero understands the cost immediately. If fire follows him, he will be alone. If it does not, the village gains breathing room at the expense of his isolation. The decision is made without ceremony. That night, he prepares in silence. No weapons, no supplies beyond what can be carried without weight. The cold remains in around him, responsive but restrained. Children sleep unaware. Hunters rotate positions as always. The village does not gather to mark his leaving. That, too, is intentional. Balance does not pause to acknowledge sacrifice. At the edge of the ice, Sub-Zero stops once, looking back at the low shapes of dwellings against the horizon. This place has altered him more in weeks than decades of violence ever did. It has taught him how exhausting restraint can be, and how necessary. He does not know if he will survive what follows. He knows only that remaining would eventually break what he has learned to protect. He steps forward. The ice flexes, then steadies, accepting his weight without complaint. He moves eastward into a landscape that refuses permanence. Each step carries him farther from the fixed point fire he has been studying. Behind him, the village remains quiet, unaltered, balanced. Far beyond sight, fire will notice soon enough. But when it does, it will find not a line to break, but a moving absence. Something harder pinned down, harder to exhaust, and far more dangerous to misunderstand. The departure is not marked by pursuit at first. That is the Fire Nation's mistake. Sub-Zero moves eastward across ice that shifts beneath him in slow, deliberate negotiation, never allowing himself to become a silhouette against the horizon for long. He does not hurry. Speed would be a declaration. He moved with the same measured discipline he learned beside the basin, letting the cold form thinly where it must, yielding where it should. Behind him, the village recedes into indistinction, not hidden, but no longer centered in the pressure that has defined the last weeks. By the second day, the air changes. The faint metallic tang of fire is still present, but diffused now, uncertain of direction. Sub-Zero feels it searching, not advancing, like heat pressed against a sealed door, unsure which hinge to test. The Fire Nation has noticed his absence. The perimeter they built around the settlement no longer encloses the anomaly they came to measure. He knows the recalculation will take time. Fire prefers certainty. It will not scatter its strength without confirmation. That delay is the opening he's created, and it will not last. The ice thins as he travels, breaking into wide, shifting plates separated by dark seams of water. This is not territory meant for control. It resists mapping, resists permanence. Sub-Zero adapts his steps instinctively now, adjusting weight, allowing momentum to carry him where footing disappears. The cold follows him, not as armor, but as accommodation, forming just enough structure to allow passage before dissolving again. It is the purest expression of what he has been learning. Influence without occupation. On the third night, the pursuit begins. He senses it not through sound or sight, but through pressure. Heat introduced at a distance, testing the ice ahead of him rather than behind. Fire Nation scouts, cautious and disciplined, probing his path to determine whether he is fleeing blindly or leading them somewhere deliberate. Sub-Zero does not alter his course. He lets them see enough to remain interested, but not enough to understand. When the first attack comes, it is restrained. A lance of heat schemes the surface of the ice ahead, cracking it into widening fractures. Sub-Zero does not counter with force. He steps into collapse, letting himself fall into freezing water without hesitation. The shock steals his breath, but the cold responds instantly, not sealing the surface, but shaping it around his movement, allowing him to emerge yards away, already climbing onto a different plate. The scouts hesitate. That hesitation is everything. They escalate cautiously after that. Each move designed to provoke a decisive response. Each time, Sub-Zero refuses to give it. He allows ice to form and unform, to fail and recover, turning the terrain itself into an argument. Fire melts. Ice yields. Water absorbs. Nothing breaks cleanly enough to justify full commitment. By dawn, the pursuit has stretched thin. The Fire Nation has followed him far enough to feel exposed, but not far enough to retreat without loss of face. Sub-Zero senses a tension building behind him like a held breath. They will either press harder or disengage and refocus elsewhere. Both outcomes serve his purpose. He does not allow himself to rest. Fatigue presses deep now, his body carrying the cost of constant restraint. Every instinct screams for finality, for a single overwhelming freeze that would end the chase decisively. He ignores it, anchoring himself instead to the slow, indifferent movement of the sea. It is the only rhythm here that does not lie. As the sun rises, he reaches a region where ice gives way almost entirely to open water, broken only by drifting flows. This is a threshold. Beyond it, pursuit becomes costly, uncertain, dangerous to sustain. Sub-Zero steps onto the last stable plate and waits. The Fire Nation scouts do not follow immediately. They observe from a distance, heat shimmering faintly around them, calculating. Sub-Zero meets their gaze without hostility, without challenge. He does not threaten. He does not retreat. He simply stands, balanced on a surface that exists only because it agrees to. The message is not lost. After a long moment, the heat withdraws slightly. Signals pass between distant silhouettes. The pursuit does not end, but it pauses. Fire has learned what it needed here. He is not a fixed asset. He is not a weapon that can be forced into certainty. He is a moving pressure that reshapes the ground it touches. When the scouts finally turn back, Sub-Zero does not follow them with his eyes. He lets the ice beneath him thin further, dissolving into water that carries him onward, east and away, toward places where Fire's calculations grow increasingly unreliable. Behind him, far beyond sight, the Water Tribe's village remains unchanged, balanced, no longer the center of a tightening perimeter. Fire will return there eventually. He knows that, but it will return with questions rather than certainty, forced to reconsider what it believes about control and dominance. As Sub-Zero drifts forward on shifting ice and open sea, exhaustion finally claims its due. He allows himself to rest for the first time since leaving, floating briefly, supported by cold that no longer needs to be commanded to hold him. He understands now that this is not escape. It is redefinition. The world he left behind will feel the consequences of this choice slowly, quietly, in the way balance always asserts itself. And when fire comes again, as it always does, it will find not a weapon waiting to be seized, but a discipline it cannot easily break. The water carries him farther east than he intends before exhaustion fully loosens its grip. When Sub-Zero wakes, the sky has shifted into a pale, washed blue, the sun hanging low and distant, its warmth muted by mist. He floats amid broken ice, his body supported by a thin skin of frost that forms and dissolves with each slow breath. There is no pursuit in sight, no heat pressing at the edge of awareness. Only motion, indifferent and vast. He lets himself drift for a time, accepting the sea's direction rather than resisting it. This, too, is discipline, choosing not to choose until choice matters again. Land eventually announces itself not through sight, but through change. The water grows shallower. The current alters its cadence. Ice reforms more readily beneath him, responding to submerged stone rather than open depth. When he rises, wading onto a narrow shelf of frozen shore, the cold does not surge eagerly as it once did. It settles. The difference is subtle, but unmistakable. His power no longer seeks to dominate the environment. It seeks to belong to it. The coast here is unfamiliar, jagged and exposed, shaped by tides rather than shelter. No village lights, no smoke, only rock, ice, and wind. Sub-Zero moves inland cautiously, aware that isolation is not safety, merely another condition. Fire may not be here yet, but imbalance has a way of attracting attention wherever it settles. He finds refuge in a shallow cave carved by water long before ice claimed the region. Inside, the air is still, carrying the mineral scent of stone and salt. He rests without freezing the entrance, allowing the cold to linger naturally rather than sealing the world out. Sleep comes unevenly, threaded with half-dreams of shifting ice and distant heat. But it comes. When he wakes again, the sense of being watched returns, not by enemies, but by the world itself. The cold outside is alive with subtle variation, responding to weather patterns rather than his presence. He steps out onto the ice and feels no immediate pull to shape it. That absence would have terrified him once. Now it feels earned. He understands that what he has become is neither water tribe nor assassin, neither weapon nor guardian. He is something between states, defined less by what he can pose and by what he can endure without breaking. The Fire Nation will adapt to this eventually. It always does. But adaptation requires time, and time redistributes pressure in ways force cannot predict. Sub-Zero moves on before certainty can find him again. As he travels, rumors will follow more slowly than he does. Of a man who crosses ice without command, whose cold does not scar the land it touches, whose presence unsettles fire not by defiance, but by refusal to be defined. Such rumors will be misunderstood. They always are. But misunderstanding, he has learned, can be a form of protection. Far to the west, the Water Tribe's village will breathe easier, its rhythms slowly returning to what they were before attention arrived. Fire will hesitate there now, uncertain whether the anomaly still lingers, unwilling to commit resources without clarity. Balance will reassert itself quietly, not as victory, but as continuity. And somewhere between ice and sea, moving without banners or declarations, Sub-Zero continues forward, not seeking redemption, not seeking battle, but carry with him a discipline forged not in conquest, but in restraint. The cold follows him still, but it no longer sharpens itself in anticipation. It listens, and that he knows is enough. The world does not announce the transition. It rarely does. Sub-Zero understands this as he moves inland from the broken coast. Following terrain that resists ownership, ice gives way to packed snow, snow to frozen earth, each change demanding a different kind of attention. The cold no longer surges ahead of him, scouting the way like a weapon eager for release. It stays close now, responsive but reserved, forming only when circumstance requires it. The absence of constant assertion feels like standing without armor. It also feels honest. By the third day, the land begins to speak in unfamiliar ways. Wind carries moisture instead of salt. The ice beneath his feet loses its glassy clarity, becoming granular, layered with old snowfall compressed by time rather than tide. This is not water tribe territory. The rhythm is different, less fluid, less forgiving. He senses eyes long before he sees anyone, a pressure not of heat, but of caution. They watch him from distance at first, shapes among stone and ice, still enough to be mistaken for terrain. Hunters, not soldiers. Their posture is guarded but not aggressive. When Sub-Zero slows, they do not advance. When he moves again, they shadow him without sound. This is a land where survival has taught restraint of a different kind. He allows himself to be seen. The choice is deliberate. He steps into a clearing where snow thins over frozen ground, his breath visible, his presence unmistakable. Frost does not leap to his skin. It remains a quiet suggestion. The watchers hesitate, recalculating. Eventually one approaches, hands empty, movements careful. The exchange that follows is brief and wary, words unfamiliar but tone precise. Sub-Zero answers sparingly, offering nothing that resembles threat or invitation. They lead him to their settlement at dusk. It is smaller than the polar village, built into rock rather than ice, designed to endure rather than adapt. Fire burns openly here, not as dominance but necessity. Sub-Zero feels its presence immediately, the heat pressing against the cold within him, testing boundaries he has only just learned to maintain. The instinct to counter flares sharply. He reins it in, breathing slowly, letting the cold thin rather than harden. The people here react differently to him. Where the water tribe assess imbalance, these people assess risk. His control unsettles them, not because it is uncontrolled, but because it is unfamiliar. Children are kept close. Elders speak in low voices. He feels the weight of reputation forming before action. The beginning of a story he does not control. That night, as he sits near the edge of the firelight, he senses something else stirring. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Not fire, not pursuit. Something older, quieter, reacting to the way cold and restraint now coexist within him. The land itself seems to listen, uncertain whether to reject him or learn him. Sub-Zero understands then that leaving the water tribe did not end his trial. It widened it. Balance here will not look the same. It will demand different sacrifices, different refusals. And somewhere far behind him, fire will still be recalculating, adapting to the absence he left in its grasp. He closes his eyes briefly, letting the warmth of fire brush against his skin without answering it. The cold does not rise in protest. It waits. This place will test him next, not with pressure alone, but with choice, whether restraint can survive in lands where balance is not taught, only endured. The settlement does not sleep deeply. Sub-Zero senses in the way footsteps continue long after night should have settled, in the way conversations pause rather than end when he shifts his weight. Fire crackles at the center of the dwellings, bright and unapologetic, a living thing fed openly rather than hidden. It presses against him constantly, not as threat, but as insistence. Here, warmth is survival made visible. It does not negotiate. It consumes what it needs. He sits at the edge of that light, deliberately close enough to feel its pull without answering it. The cold inside him tightens in response, instinctively seeking to counterbalance, to assert itself the way it always has. He slows his breathing until the impulse dulls. The fire remains fire. The cold remains quiet. The coexistence is uneasy, but it holds. An elder approaches after midnight, movements careful but unafraid. This one carries no symbols of authority beyond age and endurance. He sits across from Sub-Zero without invitation, eyes reflecting flame and shadow in equal measure. The man speaks slowly, voice roughened by years of wind and smoke. Sub-Zero does not understand words, but he understands a question beneath them. "What are you?" He answers with silence first. Then, with a gesture, he places his palm on the frozen ground between them and allows the cold to surface just enough to be felt, not seen. Frost gathers faintly, then thins again, leaving the earth unchanged. The elder watches closely, expression unreadable. Sub-Zero follows emotion by extending his other hand toward the fire, stopping short of the flame. He does not suppress the cold this time. He lets both exist unforced, side by side. The elder exhales slowly. The sound is not relief. It is recognition. Word spreads by morning without announcement. The settlement does not panic. It adjusts. People give him space without isolation. He is watched but not hunted. He is an uncertainty they will not resolve quickly. And in that delay, a form of balance emerges. Not harmony. Truce. As days pass, Sub-Zero learns the contours of this land. The cold here is harsher, less forgiving, shaped by rock and scarcity rather than water's patience. Fire is essential, not optional. He is forced to make constant, conscious choices about when to thin the cold and when to allow it to exist at all. Each decision costs him focus. Each refusal sharpens his awareness of consequence. One afternoon, a hunter returns injured, leg torn by rock and ice during a fall. Blood darkens the snow. Instinct surges. Freezing would stop the bleeding instantly. It would also risk damage no one here understands. Sub-Zero kneels, hands trembling slightly, and chooses restraint again. He cools the air instead of the wound, slowing the blood without sealing it. Others bind the leg. The hunter survives. The settlement watches in silence. That night, Sub-Zero feels the older present again, stronger now. Not fire, not pursuit, something woven into the land's endurance. Drawn to imbalance that refuses to declare itself. He does not chase the sensation. He lets it exist at the edge of awareness, the way he has learned to let the cold exist. Far away, fire will eventually find his trail again. He knows that with certainty. But here, in a place where survival is blunt and balance is earned daily without philosophy, his discipline is being tested in a new way, not against pressure alone, but against necessity. He stands beneath an unfamiliar sky, feeling both heat and cold brush against him without demanding allegiance. The world has not decided what he is yet. Neither has he. For now, that uncertainty holds. The presence reveals itself at the edge of endurance, not spectacle. Sub-Zero becomes aware of it the way one becomes aware of thinning ice before it breaks. Through small inconsistencies that refuse to be ignored, snow settles differently beyond the settlement's perimeter. Sound carries farther than it should, then dies abruptly. At night, the firelight bends at odd angles, shadows stretching where no body stands to cast them. The elders feel it too. They do not name it. Naming would suggest ownership, and nothing here is owned lightly. Instead, they adjust their routines. Hunting parties return earlier. Fires are banked lower. Children are kept closer to stone than to open ground. The land has entered a listening state, and anything that listens this intently is deciding whether to accept or expel. Sub-Zero does not move to confront it. That instinct still flickers, sharp and immediate, but he has learned the cost of answering every tension with action. He remains within the settlement's orbit, maintaining the same disciplined equilibrium that has unsettled both fire and water alike. The cold inside him stays thin, responsive, neither suppressed nor sharpened. He allows exhaustion to remain. It anchors him to the present. On the seventh night, the presence crosses a threshold. It does not arrive. It aligns. Sub-Zero feels it when he steps beyond the firelight to breathe colder air, the ground beneath his feet firm and unyielding. The cold responds differently here, not rising to meet him, but settling downward, drawn into the earth itself. For a brief moment, he feels weightless, as if the distinction between standing and falling has been negotiated away. He stops. The land ahead is unchanged to the eye. Snow, stone, wind. But something has been displaced, not physically, but relationally. A balance older than the settlement, older than the fire, has adjusted to include him as a variable. The realization tightens his chest more than any threat. Being noticed by the world itself is not a privilege. It is a burden without appeal. A sound follows, low and resonant, not carried through air so much as through structure. The elders emerge from the dwellings without alarm, eyes fixed on the same empty stretch of ground. They do not form a line. They do not retreat. They stand as they always have, in positions shaped by habit rather than command. From the snow, a form takes shape without breaking the surface. It is not a creature, as Sub-Zero understands the term. There is no clear boundary where it begins or ends. The cold does not rush toward it. The fire does not recoil. Both respond as if acknowledging something that has always been present but rarely required to move. The presence does not advance. It does not threaten. It exists with intent. Sub-Zero understands then that this is not an enemy, nor an ally. It is a consequence. The land has endured centuries of imbalance imposed from above. Fire taken where it was needed, ice forced where it did not belong, survival measured in dominance rather than continuity. His arrival, carrying restraint into places that knew only endurance, has disrupted an equilibrium that relied on predictability. The presence has emerged not to punish, but to assess whether this disruption will stabilize or fracture what remains. He steps forward once, slowly, deliberately, ensuring every movement is visible and unhurried. The elders do not stop him. This is his burden to carry. The coal within him stirs, uncertain, but does not sharpen. He lets it remain incomplete, unfinished, the way he himself now is. He lowers himself to one knee on frozen ground and places his palm against the earth. The contact is immediate and overwhelming. Not pain, not cold, memory. The land does not speak in words. It offers weight, age, repetition. Seasons stacked upon seasons. Fires burned and extinguished. Ice advancing and retreating. Survival without triumph. Endurance without narrative. Sub-Zero's breath falters once before he steadies it, anchoring himself to the slow rhythm beneath sensation. He does not offer power. He offers restraint. The presence responds by doing nothing dramatic. It does not withdraw. It does not press closer. It simply settles, accepting his position as unresolved rather than hostile. The tension in the air loosens slightly, like a knot eased but not untied. When Sub-Zero rises, the form has already begun to dissolve back into suggestion, into variance in snow and shadow. The land exhales, a sound felt more than heard. The settlement does not celebrate. There is nothing to celebrate. A balance has shifted, but it has not concluded. That night, the fire burned a little steadier. The cold no longer presses at Sub-Zero's thoughts. Something fundamental has been acknowledged, not solved. He understands now that his path will continue to draw these moments, where restraint itself becomes a force the world must account for. Far beyond these lands, fire still recalculates. It always will. But here, something older has decided not to reject him outright. That is not safety. It is permission to continue. And so he does.